So picture this. It's 586 BC, and tens of thousands of people are just being force-marched across this absolute scorching desert.
Yeah, it's a completely brutal scene.
Right. I mean, they have chains around their necks, their homes are quite literally burning miles behind them, and their whole national identity is just being systematically, violently erased.
It's total devastation.
Exactly. But, and this is the thing that really gets me, the most terrifying part of this entire story isn't the physical deportation.
No, it's really not.
It's not the chains, it's not the desert, it's this chilling reality that they'd actually been living in exile for decades before they ever even packed a single bag.
And that right there is the crucial paradox we are looking at today. Because, we are so conditioned to think of displacement purely in terms of geography.
Right, like I cross a border, so I'm in exile.
Exactly. You change an address, you're in exile. But this historical catastrophe in 586 BC, it was really just the outward manifestation of an internal collapse.
A collapse that happened way before the enemy even showed up.
Long before the first soldier ever breached the city walls. Yes.
So welcome to our deep dive. Today we are immersing ourselves in this fascinating stack of research and these really detailed infographics by Chris Arvilasis. It's titled Exile, Idolatry, and Apostasy, Israel Abandons Covenant Faithfulness.
It's an incredibly dense, incredibly rich set of material.
It really is. And our mission for you listening today is to basically fundamentally dismantle and rebuild how you understand that whole concept of exile.
Because it is so much more than a history lesson.
Exactly. We're going to look at how a society culturally amnesias itself. We're going to step into the ancient courtroom of the biblical prophets, and we are going to trace this grand narrative that starts all the way back in the Garden of Eden.
And ends, surprisingly enough, squarely in the middle of your modern, everyday search for meaning.
Yes. So to truly grasp the weight of this, we have to recognize we aren't just talking about ancient history.
Right. If you view the Babylonian exile as just, a geopolitical shifting of borders thousands of years ago, you're going to completely miss the point.
The profound relevance just totally passes you by.
Exactly. Because exile, as we're going to uncover today, is actually a profound spiritual diagnosis of the human condition.
Okay, so let's start with the root cause, because Velazquez argues pretty forcefully that the engine driving this whole societal collapse is idolatry.
Which is a loaded word for us today.
It really is. I mean, as modern people, we hear idolatry, and we immediately picture, someone bowing down to a golden statue.
Or sacrificing a goat to a weather god.
Right. It feels very primitive. It feels completely disconnected from our daily lives.
Well, it does feel archaic if you just leave the definition at that literal surface level.
Sure.
But the research here reframes idolatry. It's not merely a primitive religious practice. It's actually defined as exchanging the glory of the Creator for something less.
So it's about trust, really.
Exactly. It is a fundamental shifting of ultimate trust. It's taking your ultimate sense of security or your ultimate fear, your ultimate love, and attaching it to something created.
Rather than the creator himself. Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of that, because there's a phrase in this research that honestly just stopped me in my tracks.
Oh, the epistemological issue.
Yes. It says idolatry is fundamentally an epistemological issue, and that it distorts reality before it ever destroys people.
I love that phrasing.
I mean, wait, slow down on that, though, because epistemological issue is a pretty heavy philosophical term. What does that actually mean for an ancient person making a decision?
Well, epistemology is simply the study of how we know what is true.
Like, how we perceive reality.
Exactly. So when the text says idolatry is an epistemological issue, it means that when you attach your ultimate trust to a false god, you are fundamentally altering your perception of reality itself.
Oh, wow. So you're literally seeing the world wrong.
You begin living under massive illusions about where real power, meaning, and security actually come from.
I'm trying to picture the psychology of this for, an ancient Israelite leader, because I don't think they just woke up one morning and decided, you know what, let's just completely abandon Yahweh.
No, it rarely works like that.
It feels more like they were hedging their bets. Can we think about this like a financial portfolio?
I actually think that's a really illuminating way to approach it. Walk me through what you mean.
Okay, so say I'm an ancient Israelite king.
Right.
And there's this massive Assyrian army gathering on my northern border.
A very real, very terrifying threat.
Right, so relying solely on an invisible god, that feels like putting my entire life savings, my whole national security apparatus, into a single high-risk, invisible asset.
And the anxiety of the invisible has to be just overwhelming in that moment.
It has to be.
Because covenant faithfulness required deep, invisible trust. You can't manipulate Yahweh.
You can't put him in a box.
Exactly. You cannot force his hand.
Right, so my anxiety spikes. I'm the king. I decide I need to, diversify my spiritual portfolio.
Naturally.
I need some tangible, low-risk treasury bonds to balance out my invisible assets. So I sign a treaty with Egypt to secure their chariots.
Makes political sense.
Right. Then I marry the daughter of a neighboring king to secure a political alliance. And then, just to cover my agricultural bases, I build a small shrine to Baal.
The Canaanite storm god.
Yeah, just in case there's a drought next season. I mean, I haven't entirely stopped worshiping Yahweh, but I've diversified my trust.
And in doing so, you have completely breached the exclusivity clause of the covenant.
Ah, so that's the issue.
What you call hedging your bets, the prophets call spiritual adultery.
Wow. Okay.
But look at what has happened to your epistemology here. Your perception of reality.
Right, the glitch in the system.
You now genuinely believe that your security comes from Egyptian chariots and Canaanite rain gods. You are inhabiting a completely false world.
Because I'm trusting things that are actually entirely fragile.
Exactly.
Can we think of it kind of like wearing a pair of augmented reality glasses that are slowly glitching out?
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Like, at first, everything looks fine. You're walking around your living room. But eventually, the software glitches so bad that you're inhabiting a completely false world.
You're bumping into walls that aren't actually there.
Yes. And you're completely missing the real dangers, like a giant hole in the floor because the glasses show a rug. And the terrifying part is that the glitch, in reality, feels incredibly safe for a while.
Because the Egyptian army is tangible. The shrine to Baal is tangible. You can physically touch them.
So the illusion of security is profound.
You feel safe while you are actually standing on a trapdoor. You are living in a distorted reality.
And the sources point out this applies to their own religion too, right?
Yes. The text explicitly notes that the Israelites even began to view the physical temple in Jerusalem not as a place of worship, but as a magic talisman.
Like a lucky rabbit's foot.
Precisely. They thought, well, God's house is here, so we are invincible, regardless of how we actually live.
Which is a complete distortion of reality.
It's the ultimate glitch in the AR glasses.
So if idolatry is the process of building this massive illusion, then what is the actual exile?
Exile is simply the sudden, violent collapse of the illusion.
The glasses turn off.
The glasses power down. It is the moment the Egyptian chariots fail, the rain doesn't come, and the temple is burned to the ground.
And you realize you've been standing in an empty room the whole time.
You realize you have been living in a completely vulnerable, displaced state all along.
So, like we said at the start, the physical deportation to Babylon was just the outward manifestation of the spiritual deportation that had already happened in their hearts years prior.
Exactly.
Which brings up a massive psychological mystery for me looking at this timeline. How does an entire nation adopt this illusion in the first place?
Well, Villasis makes a really crucial point here, that no one wakes up in exile.
Right, it's a slow fade.
Yeah.
The research charts this very specific cumulative path to apostasy.
Yes. The anatomy of apostasy is not defined as just some innocent spiritual drift or a momentary weakness.
It's heavier than that.
It is defined as covenant treason. It is deliberate, but you're right, it is incremental.
Walk us through this path, because looking at the breakdown in the infographics, it starts with something almost imperceptible.
It begins with what the research labels small compromises.
Small compromises.
It's never full-blown treason on day one.
Right.
It is a little concession here, a slight bending of the rules there.
Like my example of just building one little shrine to Baal.
Exactly. Just a small treaty with a pagan nation. Just a minor syncretism in worship. But over time, these small compromises compound.
And that leads to the next stage, which the source calls tolerated sin.
Tolerated sin.
Now that implies a cultural shift, doesn't it?
It does. It's no longer just a private slip-up by one person. It becomes a permitted part of the societal fabric.
The culture just stops being shocked by it.
It becomes the new normal.
This maps so perfectly onto modern life. I mean, think about corporate culture, or even just our own personal habits.
Oh, absolutely.
The first time you, say, cut a corner on an expense report, it keeps you up at night. You're sweating.
You feel the guilt.
Right. But the 50th time you do it, you don't even blink. And everyone else in your department is doing it too. It just becomes tolerated.
And that transition from guilt to apathy is what leads directly to the third stage. A hardening of heart.
Okay, a hardening of heart. This feels like a critical psychological threshold.
It is a profound spiritual threshold.
Ah.
Because you are no longer just tolerating the compromise. You are actively defending it.
Oh, wow. So you're justifying it now.
You become entirely callous to conviction.
It's like you build a physical callus over your conscience so that it literally just doesn't hurt when you touch the hot stove anymore.
Precisely. And this hardened heart inevitably blossoms into the fourth stage, which the source identifies as idolatry and injustice.
So this is where the internal rot becomes a massive external crisis.
Yes. The research points out a really important connection here. Because their worship was corrupted by idolatry, their treatment of other human beings became corrupted.
Because whatever you worship dictates how you treat people.
Unavoidably.
If you worship power and wealth, you are inevitably going to start exploiting the vulnerable to feed your idol.
Your distorted reality requires constant fuel.
And usually that fuel is other people.
That is exactly the dynamic. Which leads to the penultimate step. God's warnings ignored.
Right?
As we will see, God sends messengers, but the hardened heart refuses to listen. And that culminates tragically in the final step. Judgment and exile.
Okay, I have to stop you there for a second because I struggle to wrap my head around this progression when I think about the specific history of ancient Israel.
What's the thinking point for you?
Well, I want you, the listener, to think about this for a second. It is so easy to sit here in the 21st century and judge ancient people for being foolish, right?
Very easy.
But these people, they saw the Red Sea part. They walked on dry land. They were fed miraculously with manna in the wilderness.
They had an undeniable front row seat to overwhelming divine power.
Yes. So how does a society culturally amnesia itself that fast? How do they justify these small compromises when they have that kind of literal resume with God?
It's a huge question.
It just makes absolutely zero psychological sense to me.
It is a profound paradox, and what's fascinating here is that the research highlights this exact tension. Their apostasy was especially grievous exactly because it wasn't committed in ignorance.
They knew better.
They absolutely knew better. But if we dig into the human psychology here, we find a really uncomfortable truth. Miracles do not change human nature.
Really? Say more about that.
Think about it. Miracles only temporarily suspend our disbelief. They create a moment of profound awe.
Okay.
But awe is an incredibly fragile emotion. The moment the manna stops falling, the moment the immediate crisis returns, what happens?
The baseline human anxiety just takes over again.
Yeah, exactly. Israel wanted the benefits of the covenant, the land, the protection, the prosperity, but they bucked against the exclusivity that the Lord demanded.
They wanted the stuff without the relationship.
Right. They forgot the miracles because remembering required a constant daily submission of their will. It is so much easier to carve an idol that you can control than to submit to a God who controls you.
Wow. That hits hard. So as this slow fade is happening, as the compromises compound, the hearts harden, and the exploitation begins, God is watching all of this.
He is.
And I think a lot of people read the Old Testament and assume God is just this, this volatile, angry deity waiting for someone to step out of line so he can drop a hammer on them.
The classic caricature.
Right. But the research completely refutes that. God doesn't immediately send in the Babylonian army.
No, he does not.
He sends in the lawyers.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. He sends the prophets.
Okay, let's completely dismantle our modern idea of the biblical prophet here, because it is deeply, deeply misunderstood.
It really is.
If you ask the average person on the street today what a prophet is, they're going to picture a guy in a tattered robe standing on a street corner with a cardboard sign predicting the end of the world.
Or someone gazing into a crystal ball, trying to predict a distant, catastrophic future.
Right, the fortune teller model.
Which is a complete misunderstanding of the biblical text. The research material labels the prophets very specifically as covenant prosecutors.
Covenant prosecutors, I love that term.
To understand this, we really have to look at the legal framework of the ancient Near East. Specifically, the concept of a suzerain vassal treaty.
Okay, what is that?
In the ancient world, when a powerful emperor, a suzerain, conquered a smaller nation or rescued them, he would make a treaty with the lesser king, the vassal.
Okay, so a political contract.
Yes. And the treaty had very standard components. It listed what the great king had done for them, the laws the vassal had to follow, and a very explicit list of blessings for obedience and curses for rebellion.
So it's legally binding.
Entirely. And the relationship between God and Israel is detailed in texts like Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, was structured exactly like this.
It wasn't just a loose relationship, it was a formal covenant.
Exactly. The land they lived in was a gift held in trust under divine lordship. It was not a possession by absolute right.
Got it.
If they obeyed, they would experience security and presence. If they turned to other gods and broke the contract, the consequences were clearly stated from day one.
Like famine, defeat, removal from the land.
All explicitly laid out in the contract they signed.
So the prophets aren't just predicting the future out of nowhere. They are literally just reading the terms and conditions of a contract that Israel already agreed to.
They are process servers.
Process servers.
They are bringing God's lawsuit against Israel for covenant infidelity. They're opening the contract, pointing to the specific clauses Israel is violating, and announcing that the legally agreed-upon penalties are about to be enforced.
That reframes everything. And the research gives us this incredible roster of these prophets and how they prosecuted the case. It is fascinating to see the different angles they took.
They each had a very specific focus.
Let's look at Amos. Amos seems deeply concerned with the intersection of religion and economics.
Amos is incredibly sharp. He operated during a time of great economic prosperity in Israel, but it was prosperity built entirely on the backs of the poor.
Right.
He calls out external religion that is masking internal corruption.
It's like he's looking at their massive, pristine mega temples, listening to their beautiful worship choirs and saying, your worship music is literally noise to God because you are exploiting the working class the moment you leave this building.
Exactly. He exposes the utter hypocrisy of thinking you can appease God with religious rituals while violating the core ethics of his covenant.
And then you have Isaiah, who takes a slightly different approach.
Isaiah certainly warns about social injustice, but he leans heavily into the absolute absurdity of idolatry.
Oh, the satire.
Yes, he uses biting satire. The research cites Isaiah chapter 44, which is honestly a masterpiece of ancient mockery.
Walk us through that, because Isaiah's woodworking analogy is so vivid. It's almost funny if it wasn't so tragic.
It really is. So Isaiah describes a man who plants a cedar tree. He waits years for it to grow, then he chops it down.
Okay, standard forestry.
Right. He uses half of the wood to build a fire so he can bake his bread and warm his hands.
These make sense.
And then with the exact same piece of wood, he carves the other half into a statue, bows down to it and says, "Save me, for you are my God."
It is brilliant. I mean, Isaiah's trying to shatter that epistemological illusion we talked about.
Yes, he is.
He's practically screaming at them, look at how distorted your reality has become. You are bowing down to firewood.
He's exposing the complete irrationality of trusting in a lifeless object that you yourself just created.
It highlights the profound tragedy of the human mind when it turns away from truth.
It really does. And speaking of tragedy, we have to look at Jeremiah.
Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet, right? And the imagery he uses is absolutely gut-wrenching.
The broken cisterns?
Yes. The research highlights Jeremiah 2.13, where God says through the prophet, "My people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water."
It perfectly encapsulates the profound exhaustion of idolatry.
I really want the listener to feel the weight of this metaphor. Think about the sheer physical labor involved in what Jeremiah is describing here.
It is immense.
A fountain of living water is a natural spring. It flows freely. It requires absolutely zero effort on your part. It is a pure gift. All you have to do is cup your hands and receive it.
But a cistern.
Right. A cistern in ancient Palestine had to be hacked out of solid limestone bedrock.
By hand.
It is backbreaking, grueling, exhaustive human effort just to create a container that might catch some seasonal rainwater.
And Jeremiah is pointing out the absolute insanity of this exchange.
He says, not only did you walk away from the free-flowing spring to do all this exhausting work in the hot sun, but the cisterns you carved are cracked. The water is leaking out into the dirt.
It is the perfect picture of what it feels like to chase modern idols.
It really is. You pour all your time, your energy, your love, your anxiety into these false gods, your career, your bank account, your political tribe, and they always run dry.
They demand constant labor, but they leak. They can never actually sustain you.
But of all the prophets, the one that contains the most terrifying imagery for the ancient mind is definitely Ezekiel.
Oh, Ezekiel chapters 10 and 11. It is a watershed moment in the biblical narrative.
The research highlights the specific vision. Ezekiel sees the glory of the Lord like the physical manifestation of God's presence rising up, packing its bags, and literally departing from the temple in Jerusalem.
To understand why this was so earth-shattering, we have to understand how ancient people viewed geography and theology.
Right, because in the ancient Near East, gods were entirely territorial, correct?
Precisely. If your nation went to war with another nation, it was believed that your god was literally fighting their god.
So it's a cosmic turf war.
Yes. And if your city was conquered and your temple was destroyed, the absolute conclusion in the ancient mind was that your god was weak. He lost the fight.
Marduk defeated Yahweh.
Exactly.
So if the Babylonians are at the gates of Jerusalem, the Israelites are sitting there thinking, well, Yahweh has to defend the city, because if he doesn't, he looks like a weak, defeated god to all the surrounding nations.
That was the assumption. They thought God's reputation was tied to the building.
But Ezekiel is arguing something completely revolutionary.
He is. He is saying, no, Yahweh isn't weak. Yahweh isn't being defeated by the Babylonian gods. He is packing his bags and leaving voluntarily because the house is too dirty.
Wow.
The idolatry and injustice in Jerusalem had become so intense, the defilement so deep, that God refused to stay.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This reveals a core theological principle that the research emphasizes. God's holiness necessitates exile.
Yes, this is crucial. God's departure from the temple proves that his presence cannot be presumed upon.
He's not a mess, not at all.
It is God remaining perfectly consistent with his own character and the explicit terms of the contract. He is acting with perfect moral intelligibility.
Exactly. If the covenant is real, then violations of it must have real consequences. Sin must be judged.
And eventually, the lawsuit ends. The process servers stop serving notices, and the eviction actually happens. The theological necessity of God's holiness crashes violently into human history.
The historical reality of the exiles.
The research breaks this down into two major stages. The kingdom had split into two at this point: the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah.
And the northern kingdom falls first in 722 BC to the Assyrian Empire.
Let's not gloss over the Assyrians here. When we say fell to the Assyrian Empire, it sounds very sterile, like a history textbook. But who are the Assyrians?
The Assyrians were the terror of the ancient world.
That's putting it mildly.
They weaponized psychological warfare and sheer brutality. I mean, they were known for flaying people alive, impaling leaders on stakes outside conquered cities.
Just horrific stuff. And their primary tactic for suppressing rebellion was mass deportation. They would take an entire conquered population, rip them out of their homeland, and just scatter them across the empire to completely destroy their national and cultural identity.
It's ethnic and cultural erasure on an industrial scale.
Yes.
So the northern kingdom of Israel experiences this absolute horror in 722 BC. They are swept away. Now, you would think that the southern kingdom of Judah, sitting just a few miles south, would watch the smoke rising from their northern neighbors and say, okay, this is real, the prophets were right, we need to turn this ship around immediately.
You would certainly think so.
But they don't.
But the profound blindness of idolatry, or the epistemological glitch, is that it always convinces you that you are the exception.
It won't happen to us.
Right. Despite seeing the covenant curse become a historical, bloody reality right next door, Judah continued in their rebellion.
They kept hedging their bets.
They continued their syncretism. And so, just over a century later, in 586 DC, their illusion finally collapses too.
Jerusalem falls to the Babylonian Empire under King Nebuchadnezzar. The city is besieged, starved, and eventually breached. The city is burned. But the most devastating blow, the absolute center of the trauma, is the destruction of the temple.
To understand the grief of this moment, we really have to understand what the land of the temple meant to them. The research points out that the land was sacramental in covenant life.
Wait, halt right there. When I hear the word sacramental, I instantly think of, like, a Catholic mass or taking communion or a baptism.
Right, modern religious category.
Yeah. What does that word mean to a guy growing barley in ancient Judah? Let's strip away the modern religious baggage.
That's a fair point. In this context, sacramental simply means that a physical, material object is the visible sign of an invisible spiritual reality.
Okay, so it points to something deeper.
For the ancient Israelite, the physical dirt they farmed, the hills they lived on, were not just real estate. They were the material, physical proof of God's promise and his presence.
So losing the land wasn't just losing your house or your farm, it was losing the physical proof that God loved you.
Exactly. It was the spatial sign that you belonged to God. And the temple was the epicenter of that reality. The temple was viewed as the literal intersection of heaven and earth.
The one place on the planet where God's space and human space overlapped.
Yes.
So when the Babylonians burn it to the ground, it's not just a military defeat, it is a theological apocalypse.
The research highlights Psalm 137 here, which is written directly out of this exact trauma. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land?
Just put yourself in that scenario. You have survived a brutal siege, you have watched your neighbors die, you have been forced marched across a desert, you are now sitting in the dust of a pagan empire.
Everything you know is gone.
Your home is ash, your temple is gone, and the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that the prophets told you this was going to happen, and, deep in your bones, that this is the direct result of your own society's corruption.
It's a crushing realization.
The research calls this liturgical and theological pain, not just patriotism. The rhythms of your entire universe have been shattered.
And sitting by those rivers in Babylon, the absolute most logical conclusion you could reach is that the story is completely over.
That the covenant is dead.
That God has abandoned us forever, yes.
Which brings us to a major misunderstanding that the research actively corrects. Because it points out that many people assume exile means God has permanently abandoned his people.
And the response from the biblical text is a resounding no.
It's not the end.
The judgment was severe. It was devastating. But it was not pure annihilation. God preserves a remnant. The prophets, even while sitting in the dust of Babylon, continue to speak.
That's amazing.
The research uncovers this beautiful, staggering paradox. The very announcement of the exile contained the seeds of a promise of return.
So the punishment has a purpose.
God's discipline is always ultimately oriented toward restoration.
This is such a wild cycle, though. God rescues a people, they make a contract, they slowly fade into idolatry, they ignore the warnings, their illusion collapses into brutal exile, and then God promises to restore them.
Over and over.
To understand why this cycle keeps happening, the research does something breathtaking. It stops looking just at the nation of Israel and zooms all the way out to the blueprint of human history.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Babylonian exile isn't just an isolated historical tragedy. It is a fractal.
A fractal.
It's a small pattern that represents a much larger reality. The research places the Babylonian exile within a massive biblical meta-narrative starting long before Israel ever existed.
It starts in the Garden of Eden.
It starts with creation itself. The foundational premise of the biblical narrative is that from eternity, God purposed to dwell with a people.
Right.
Creation is not just random matter. It is ordered fellowship. Humanity was designed at its core for communion with the divine. Unity with God is our creational design.
But then comes the fall. Adam and Eve rebel. And the research makes a connection here that completely blew my mind.
The archetype.
Yes, the fall of Adam and Eve is the deep archetype of all exile.
Think about the mechanics of the fall. When Adam and Eve sin, what is the immediate consequence?
They are expelled from Eden?
They are barred from the tree of life. And crucially, the text says they are driven eastward.
East of Eden.
Yes. The research argues that Israel's exile to Babylon is essentially a national replay of that primal banishment.
Wow.
Both events describe the exact same spiritual physics. Sin always, inevitably, results in separation from God and a loss of place.
So Babylon isn't just a city in Mesopotamia. Babylon is a mirror.
Exactly.
It's showing us the universal human condition. It is saying, look at these weeping Israelites sitting by the river, displaced, alienated, and longing for a home they can't return to. That is actually a picture of every single human soul apart from God.
We are all essentially living east of Eden.
We are all spiritually displaced. And as the meta-narrative continues from the fall through the creation of the covenant and into the era of the human kings, we see this recurring theme.
Right. Israel was called to reverse the curse of the fall. They were given human kings to lead them in righteousness.
But the kings fail.
The kings fail, the national structures become corrupt, and the throne eventually sits empty.
Which brings us back to the dust of Babylon. And here, the research drops what I consider a massive theological bomb.
Oh, this is the core of it all.
It says, exile reveals the impossibility of self-redemption.
This is perhaps the most critical insight in the entire study. Israel cannot work its way back home.
They can't just try harder.
You cannot just try harder to fix a covenant you fundamentally shattered. The problem isn't logistical. It's not a matter of organizing a better army to march back to Jerusalem.
Right.
The problem is spiritual. It requires a fundamental surgical change in human nature.
To use our earlier analogy, you can't unglitch the AR glasses while you're still wearing them. Your perception is too compromised.
Precisely. The issue is too deep for institutional fixes, political policies, or behavioral modification. You need someone from the outside to intervene. You need not just a geographical return to the land, but you need a new heart.
So, if human effort is entirely useless, what happens to these people sitting in exile? Does God just leave them there to suffer until they magically figure it out?
No, because as the research insists, exile is judgment, yes, but it is also preparation.
Preparation.
This is the great turning point in the narrative.
Mm.
Babylon is not just a graveyard, it is a crucible. In exile, all of the false securities, the Egyptian alliances, the wealth, the physical temple, they are violently stripped away.
There is zero illusion of self-sufficiency left.
None. You are finally seeing reality for what it is.
The cardboard box is just a cardboard box. You can't hide behind the temple anymore because it's gone.
And in that stripped-down, agonizingly vulnerable state, a purified longing can finally emerge. God uses the fire of the exile to preserve a remnant whose hope is entirely in Him rather than in their institutions. The research points to figures like Daniel and Ezekiel, who are living in the very heart of this pagan empire, yet they remain fiercely faithful.
And through them, God proves a point that completely short-circuited the ancient mind, right? He's not confined to the zip code of Jerusalem.
Right. If the gods are territorial, Yahweh is supposed to be powerless in Babylon.
But Daniel is interpreting dreams for the Babylonian king. Ezekiel is seeing visions of God's glory on the banks of a Babylonian river.
God is showing that He is the sovereign Lord of all the earth, even in the place of their punishment.
And in this place of preparation, the prophets begin to speak of a new covenant.
We talked about Jeremiah and the broken cisterns earlier. Well, in Jeremiah 31 and also in Ezekiel 36, the nature of the promise fundamentally shifts.
That's so.
God doesn't just promise to give them their land back. He says, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. He promises to actually change their internal nature so they will finally have the capacity to remain faithful.
But that leaves a massive, glaring question hanging over the entire story.
How is this achieved?
Exactly. If human effort can't do it, and self-redemption is impossible, how does a perfectly holy God bring a rebellious, idolatrous people back into His presence without compromising His justice? Somebody has to pay the penalty of the broken contract.
And this brings us to the ultimate resolution in the research material. The answer to how this is achieved is not a what or a policy or a new human institution.
It's a who?
The Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth.
The way the research frames the entry of Jesus into this narrative is absolutely staggering.
That's beautiful.
He doesn't enter the story as a conquering king riding a war horse to crush the Romans and restore the borders of Israel. He enters as the faithful Israelite who is himself exiled.
Think deeply about the trajectory of Jesus' life as presented in the text. He is rejected by His own people. He is led outside the city gate of Jerusalem, a powerful spatial symbol of being cast out, of banishment. He is crucified in utter humiliation. He is actively bearing the curse of the law that Israel and all of humanity deserved.
This completely inverts the entire mechanism of ancient worship. I want to make sure we grasp this.
It's a total paradigm shift.
In every other ancient religion, you sacrifice yourself or your children or your wealth to appease the angry God and earn your way back into His good graces. You pay the price to get back into the city.
Yes.
But here, the God Himself gets thrown out of His own city. He takes on the status of the cursed exile. He absorbs the penalty of the broken contract just so He can escort the rebels back inside.
It is a total subversion of the human religious instinct. The text calls Jesus the true remnant, the obedient son, and the ultimate restorer of the exiled.
Because He took the punishment.
Because He willingly took the judgment, the isolation, and the displacement of the exile upon Himself, God's holiness is entirely satisfied. And because justice is satisfied, God's mercy can flow freely to restore anyone who repents.
He goes into the darkest, furthest, most God-forsaken region east of Eden to find us, and He carves open the way home.
That is the theological climax of the entire narrative.
So, we have traveled from the Garden of Eden through the terrifying brutality of the Assyrian and Babylonian empires, all the way to a cross outside Jerusalem. But what does this mean for the person listening to this right now, driving in their car or sitting at their desk?
Well, the research material is highly intentional about not leaving this in the realm of abstract ancient theology. It moves directly into the practical implications for living as exiles today.
Because the reality is the church modern believers are citizens of a new kingdom, but we are still living in the tension between Christ's initial victory and the final, ultimate restoration of all things.
We are living in the already but not yet.
We are saved, but the world is still broken. The text references 1 Peter 2.11, where Peter explicitly calls believers sojourners and exiles.
We are spiritually brought near to God, but we are still pilgrims walking through a world that is deeply marked by alienation and idolatry.
And because we are still in this pilgrim state, the warnings that the prophets shouted at ancient Israel still apply directly to us.
Absolutely. The research breaks down several specific areas of application, and the first is a fierce warning to guard our hearts against modern idols.
This circles back to another misunderstanding the text addresses, the idea that idolatry is only ancient paganism.
Right, we may not be carving statues out of cedar wood to bake our bread and worship.
But what are the broken cisterns we are carving out today?
The text gives a chillingly relevant list for the modern world. Success, comfort, wealth, political ideology, romance, or the ultimate modern idol, the self.
The self.
Are we trusting the cardboard box of our financial portfolios to give us ultimate security? Are we looking to our political tribes to provide the salvation that only God can provide?
Or are we making those small compromises in our integrity at work, telling ourselves it's just how the game is played, not realizing we are initiating the slow fate of apostasy?
The warning is clear. Idolatry always eventually leads to emptiness. The cisterns will crack.
The research also highlights a very sharp word for leadership and ministry today. It warns that institutional strength can never compensate for spiritual corruption.
Man, that is a word for our cultural moment right now.
It truly is. The kings of ancient Judah tried to build massive armies, secure wealthy alliances, and maintain impressive religious buildings, all while their culture was spiritually rotting from the inside out.
And the source cautions modern leaders. You can preserve appearances for a long time with excellent PR, strong crisis management, and massive budgets, but idolatry will eventually hollow out the community.
It will collapse.
Biblical leadership has to be rooted in quiet, invisible covenant fidelity, not image management.
It is the stark difference between looking successful to the world and actually being faithful to God. But amidst all of these intense warnings, there is one practical application in this research that I found incredibly pastoral and honestly just deeply validating.
The point about homesickness.
Yes, it addresses a very specific, almost haunting feeling that I think every human being experiences: homesickness.
The text notes that the theme of exile gives us a theological vocabulary for the ache that so many people feel in a fallen world.
Think about that feeling, that low-level hum of disorientation you get sometimes, even when things are going well.
We all know it.
The sense that no matter how comfortable your house is, no matter how good your job is, this world is just, well, it's just not quite right. Something is missing.
And the research says that this homesickness, this deep longing, is not a sign that you are depressed or that you are losing your faith.
It is actually a sign that your soul remembers Eden.
It is the internal compass of the human heart, pointing toward restoration. We feel the rupture.
And the answer, the text suggests, is not to fall into paralyzing nostalgia for the past, and it is certainly not to try and build a perfect idolatrous utopia here on earth.
No, the answer is faithfulness while we wait. We are called to live with a holy displacement, actively refusing the false idols of the current age and bearing quiet witness to the coming home that God has promised.
Because the story doesn't end in the tension. The grand narrative that Velazquez maps out points toward a final consummation, the new creation.
The hope of Scripture moves entirely beyond just returning to a physical patch of land in the Middle East. It moves to a renewed, recreated earth where exile is forever impossible.
Where God dwells with us.
The text describes a future state where there is no more curse, no more estrangement, no more living east of Eden. From eternity past to eternity future, God's ultimate purpose is presence with his people.
Exile is a tragic interruption of that purpose caused by sin, but it is not the defeat of that purpose.
The final state is not wandering but home.
What a profoundly beautiful summary of the human story. As we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to thank you for walking through this massive, sweeping journey with us.
It's been a profound topic to explore.
We have moved from seeing the concept of exile as a dry historical footnote about geopolitics in 586 BC to understanding it as a piercing, incredibly accurate diagnosis of our own hearts.
We've examined our own terrifying tendency to build broken cisterns, our vulnerability to the slow fate of compromise, and the profound danger of letting our anxieties drive us into the arms of modern idols.
But above all of that, we have seen the breathtaking, scandalous grace of a God who doesn't just stand far off and watch us wander into the desert. He actually enters into our exile. He takes the curse and the displacement upon himself just so he can walk us back home.
The exiled can come home. The idolatrous can be forgiven. God judges sin, but He relentlessly restores the repentant.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your week. The research noted that when Israel was sitting in the dust of Babylon, the purpose of that pain was preparation.
A stripping away.
It was a crucible where all their false securities were violently stripped away so that a true, purified longing for their real home could be awakened. I want you to look at your own life right now.
A self-audit.
Think about the things you rely on most heavily. Are there false securities you are currently clinging to, a specific career trajectory, a relationship, a financial milestone, or even a political ideology that might actually be acting as an idol, keeping you spiritually exiled from a deeper trust in God?
It's a tough question to ask.
And consider this. What if the moments you feel the most displaced, the most homesick, the most completely out of sync with the culture around you? What if those aren't actually problems to be medicated or fixed? What if they are the very compass pointing you toward the only home that will actually last? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, stay curious, and we will see you next time.